We are obligated. This is a set aside. We are absolutely obligated to spend, I think it's 3% now? Over 3% of our budget on small business initiatives, and because of legislation, that is going to increase over time. And so we thought you should know about the program and the opportunities that it presents. So that will be presented by Stephanie Furtick, who's been at NINDS since 2004 and was offered the opportunity to lead the small business program, and it has done much better than it was under her supervision. So, Stephanie.
So good morning, everyone. So today, as Story indicated, I want to give a brief overview of the program for those of you who aren't aware of it, as well as talk about its recent reauthorization and some of the changes that are coming soon. So Story stole some of my thunder with this, but briefly, this is a congressionally mandated set-aside for small businesses. And when people think of the small business program, if you do know about it, you often think about the Small Business Innovation Research Program, or SBIR, but that's not the only program. It actually has a smaller sister program called the Small Business Technology Transfer Program, or STTR. So often, and actually earlier in Alan's talk, there was a little wedge in the budget and it said SBIR, STTR, that's the small business programs. So the difference between the SBIR and STTR is that the STTR is really focused on encouraging partnerships between small businesses and academics or nonprofit research organizations. But other than that, they're very similar. They have a very similar broad scope. They can support everything from neurotherapeutics to tools for neuroscience research. And they can support things all along the development pipeline, from bench research all the way up to early stage clinical trials. And we have specific program announcements for phase 1, phase 2 clinical trials in these programs. So I think there are some significant benefits to companies that come in through this program. This is a grant program, so unlike a lot of funding that companies get, it's non-dilutive, it's not a loan, and it can provide recognition and then help provide leverage to get additional support. I like to think of this program as de-risking technologies and products so that third-party investors can get interested and may support the commercialization of these technologies. So the programs have a phased structure. The first phase is a feasibility study. It's a smaller grant that then leads to a phase 2, which is a larger grant to do the full research and development. Now, normally a grantee comes in for a phase 1, and then after their phase 1 is successful, they come in for the phase 2. There's peer review between the phase 1 and phase 2. And you have to have a phase 1 in order to be able to come in for a phase 2. And then after the phase 2, the company is said to enter the phase 3 or commercialization stage, where they're supposed to use non-SBIR or STTR funds to finalize development of their product. Some companies come in for something called a fast track, and that combines the phase 1 and phase 2 together in one application. And why it's called a fast track is it helps reduce that delay that sometimes can happen because you have to prepare and submit and get a phase 2 application reviewed. So it cuts that time down. Now, on purpose, I put a big gap here, because for a lot of the things that we do, neurotherapeutics and diagnostics in particular, after the phase 2s, companies often don't have enough to really attract that third-party funding, let alone commercialize. And a lot of institutes have recognized that, and that's why we now have a phase 2B, which gives those phase 2 awardees a little bit of extra money to hopefully get to the point where they can either commercialize or hopefully attract that third-party funding. NIH has a number of technical assistance programs where we try to help our awardees. There's the niche assessment program, which is actually currently open. Both of these are free. So the niche assessment program provides a free service to phase 1 awardees and helps them develop the commercialization plan that's necessary for the phase 2. The commercialization assistance program helps phase 2 awardees with the next step. And so this often can be anything from preparing a presentation to give to venture capital firms or helping them figure out who or how to engage larger pharmaceutical companies. So that's an extremely brief overview for those of you, as I said, who aren't familiar with the program. Hopefully now some of the stuff I'll be saying in the rest of the presentation won't be too confusing, but I do want to focus now on their recent reauthorization. So both programs were reauthorized in 2012 to go through 2017, and changes are coming. So there were a number of changes put in with this reauthorization, I think the most since the program's inception. We are not putting all of those in at once. So we are doing a rolling implementation. So I think I get to keep this changes are coming slide up for the next 2 years. So I would encourage you to join our listserv, go to our websites, and then ask program staff if you have any questions. Since things will be changing, we're happy to help and try to explain and guide applicants or other individuals through the process. So this is the overall NIH SBIR website. And we have, as you can see here, we have the NIH reauthorization implementation link right on the main page. It gives the whole plan for our implementation, and we also have news flashes here for when things do come on board. So I'm not going to talk about all 20 provisions today, so everyone can breathe a sigh of relief. I'm going to focus on those things that I think are the most important for this group. So the first thing I want to point out is, although the size of the total award, and this is a guideline, so the guideline size of the total award, and this is in total cost, has not really changed, the limits on the award size have. So historically, NIH and NINDS in particular had flexibility with the amount of money we could give a particular project. And this was particularly important, again, for therapeutics development, because often that takes more money to get to the point where you'd attract third-party funding. So we did have a soft cap, and I put the old NINDS guidelines up here. Congress has now, in the reauthorization, put a hard cap on the program. And as you can see, the hard cap is significantly less than what we used to award. At the same time, as Story mentioned, our set-aside will be increasing, and it will be gradually increasing until it reaches 3.65% by 2017. And we are, again, required to spend that money on these programs. So the take-home message for this slide is that there are more money and smaller grants. A quick note about those budget hard caps. Again, everything is a rolling implementation. So these hard caps are in place for the general omnibus solicitation, but some of the older specific solicitations may have different budgets. And NIH has received a limited waiver from the Small Business Administration to exceed the hard caps. So as you're reading online, you may read something about that. However, I should note this is extremely limited. And NINDS, as well as other institutes, have decided not to accept things over the hard cap because of the nature of that waiver in our general omnibus solicitation. And because this is a rolling implementation, it might be confusing. We've been trying to get the word out that we really want applicants to call us. I'd much rather have someone call me, have me help them, than potentially get it wrong. So the other thing the other big change that I want to talk about is the eligibility criteria. I put all the eligibility criteria up. I'm not going to talk about all of it. I want to focus on what's highlighted in red here. So historically, companies that were majority owned by venture capital firms were not eligible for the small business programs. With the reauthorization, this has changed, and now companies that are majority owned by multiple venture capital firms, hedge funds, or private equity firms are now eligible. And the key word here is multiple. No one company can own a majority, but multiple companies added together can own a majority. So basically, you can have a company that's owned 25% by one VC and 30% by another VC. So these VC-owned firms are now allowed to apply through our general omnibus. And again, this is a rolling implementation, so some of our newer program opportunities have this. We are limited with the amount of our set aside we can give to these firms. However, we have not even remotely reached this limit. So I would encourage companies that fall in this category to please come in and apply. If you know of any of these individuals who might fall into these categories, have them come talk to me, and I can help them fill out the forms and tell them what's necessary to apply. So a couple other things that I call coming soon. As I indicated before, normally, we used to not allow a company to come in directly for a phase 2. We're now going to have a direct to phase 2 pilot in 2014, and this I think is particularly good for those companies that have managed to get feasibility funding or some funding from other sources, and it might even be from nonprofits like yourself. If they've already done that base work, they can then directly come in for that larger amount of money in the phase 2 to do that full research and development. And the other big change is that we're going to be allowing companies to switch from the SBIR to the STTR program partway through. So it used to be once you had a phase 1 in one of those two programs, you were locked into that program the entire pathway. And that's not going to be the case anymore. And I think for both of these, what these give us is flexibility, and it gives the companies flexibility to really get what they need to get the project done. So I'm going to end with some future opportunities. I think there's a lot of ways that we can work together. I think, NINDS is looking to increase the number of high quality applications. We want to fund the best science, and the percentage set aside for for these programs will be increasing. And so we really want good science to come in. And at the same time, we want to continue to have commercialization, but that's going to require an increase in partnerships because these grants are going to be so much smaller. So we're going to need to work with investors, large pharmaceutical companies, and nonprofits like yourself. And what's great about these programs is their whole point is to take things from the bench, take great innovations, and actually put them into the marketplace and put them in the hands of patients and clinicians to do some good. And so I want to end there with some information. We do have several websites that I would encourage you to take a look at. We are also on Twitter. So for the individual who asked about social media yesterday, please follow us on Twitter. And I've also put my email address here. I am happy to talk to anyone about the program or answer any questions that you might have. And with that, I'm not sure how much time I have, but there's time for 1 or 2 questions.
Hi, I just have a question about the basic difference between the two programs. I'm not clear at all on the difference between
the SBIR and
Yes.
the STTR.
Thank you.
So the STTR requires a partnership between the company and a nonprofit or academic research institution. The SBIR doesn't require it. They're encouraged, they're allowed to have that partnership, but the STTR is actually a requirement. There's some other specific things, but when you're talking about overall 50,000 feet, that's the big difference.
Okay. Thank you.
I have a question about some possible examples of what sort of things you fund. As a small rare disease organization, for instance, there are some research reagents like an antibody that it's heavily burdening an academic lab to produce this antibody. It's widely spread. One of the things we'd like to do is to see that turned into something that is commercially available. Or, for instance, the notion of we feel as though we're getting close to possibly being able to have something on the Secretary's list of neonatal screening from the heel stick blood spot. And we think that it might be time to start developing of that assay technology. Are these things that would fall in the range?
So anything that can be a product, and that definitely includes research tools or diagnostics, any of that, provided it's a company and they're developing some kind of product, that's what this can cover. And a good number of the applications that we fund are developing research tools or are developing those kind of diagnostic technologies, assays. That's a good amount of what we do. So it's not just therapeutics, although certainly that is part of it as well.
I've got a quick question on how you monitor success in this program. Do you keep metrics in terms of, let's say, how many industry partnerships you develop from the applicants that go on to the commercialization path? And do you maybe also have a way of gauging, how many products, whether it's devices or drugs, actually come to market? And do you know, just overall, how much of an impact has this made in the neurological diseases area, per se?
Sure. So this is actually, you've hit the right on one of the most difficult parts of this program. Because unlike an R01 where you get papers and those are easy to look for, right? In an SBIR, we're often funding things so early that by the time they get to the market, they may have changed hands. The company may be, have been bought or sold or leased the technology to a larger pharmaceutical company. It may not even have the same name as when we funded it. So this is something actually at the NIH level we're working very hard to deal with. And right now we do try to track that as best as we possibly can, and there's a variety of different ways that we do that. We do have an internal system now that was recently set up by the NIH that helps us track some of those success stories, but you've hit on one of the most difficult parts of this program, and it is something that across NIH we are actively working on. But I think as far as has this really made an impact, I think we did actually at a recent council presentation, we were gathering some success stories, and particularly because it's often easier to look at those, there's a number of research tools that have been put out by this program that are actually currently on the market. And I'm always amazed at the number of companies that do come in and then report later that, we had something good. And we actually recently had a company report that they are going to start selling a technology for Parkinson's disease that helps, it's a spoon that helps stabilize tremors so that people will be able to feed themselves. So without having to worry about the tremor causing an issue. So these kinds of things are the things that we support.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I came back from break late. I may have missed where you said this already.
That's okay.
Is there allowance for any international entities in these consortia?
We cannot spend funds on work done outside the United States. So while companies are certainly allowed to work with foreign entities or individuals that are not on U.S. soil, all the work in a small business application has to go towards work done in the United States.
I would say that we've also been looking at metrics of companies that have not been successful. There's something called, inside the Beltway parlance, an SBIR mill. These are small groups which simply produce grants, get them funded, and use the money and to write more grants. And we now have a record of the companies like that who have used the NINDS allocation, other neuroscience allocations, and we don't have a pay line for these. We look at each one of those grants individually, and if you've had a couple of these and you've not managed to do anything successful except the money and write another grant, you don't get funded now. So we have both positives and negatives, and we're trying to figure out how to work to make more of the really positive.